Welcome to the final episode of How to Train Your Nyx. Up until now, the focus of this series has been showing you how to give Nyx the resources she needs to become good in Conquest. Here, I'll finally show you the result of that training, and why I think she deserves the investment, through the medium of Chapter 20, colloquially known as Fuga's Wild Ride. Chapter 20 can be thought of as an appetizer for the late game of Conquest. It shares many features common to those maps, including its large size, offensive stabs, and gimmicks. Every single chapter from 20 to 26 has some kind of map or movement gimmick, like the stairs on Chapter 23 or the riggable walls on Chapter 25, that enable you to set up your units close to the enemies in preparation for a large player phase push, Nyx's specialty. On this map, that's the wind, which you can manipulate to push your units near the enemies and eliminate everything in sight. I don't intend to go over every late game map individually, as I'll have made my point by then, so instead consider Nyx's performance on this map a demo for how she performs in the late game as a whole. If this looks good to you, you'll have a pretty good idea of why I value Nyx so highly on every map from here on out. I also consider the late game the hardest part of Conquest, so if Nyx can set herself apart from or even stand above her peers at this stage, which she can, that's a great reason to use her in a serious playthrough. Chapter 20 has a lot of empty air tiles that only flyers can traverse, and flyers have a much easier time repositioning after getting blown away by the wind, which is a large part of why I'm deploying a truly comical number of flying units for this map. Let's address the elephants in the room first: Corrin and Peri. Corrin, after attaining an ace support with Camilla, used the friendship seal from Soleil's parallel to become a Wyvern Lord for rally defense. She utilized her excellent skill stat and Beast Killer access to get all the experience to reach that milestone immediately on Chapter 19, meaning she already has half the rallies she needs for her completed build. As you recall, I played those two maps off camera to feed my non-Nyx training projects. That also includes Peri, who reclassed twice since we last saw her. First to Dark Knight with a Heart Seal to improve her hit rates with Heartseeker, and again to Wyvern Lord from Xander Marriage, not for utility but for combat. If that doesn't seem comical to you yet, how about Keaton? His marriage to Corrin wasn't just so she could get rally strength. It was also so he could go into the Sky Knight class line. Between Falcon and Kinchi is better, since bows are pretty solid and being landslogged is pretty sad. One of Keaton's biggest weaknesses is a lack of weapon ranks, but luckily you don't need much more than a bronze bow to succeed in a class like Kinchi, unless your name is Nyx. So while I'm normally not a fan of Keaton as a unit, I'm hoping this will help me appreciate his strengths. Darting Blow also helps, since Keaton needs more help with his speed than his strength. I was originally going to use this partner seal on Jacob, but he's been performing pretty poorly lately, so Keaton's high stats and bow access are much more appreciated for this map. Our remaining flyers are Nyx, Mozu, Camilla, Percy even, joining us alongside Soleil to rep the second generation, and... oh? Who's this? Niles, but evil and freaked up? What's going on, buddy? He's here to tell me to let you all in on a little secret. See, I actually have a pretty low opinion of most of the units I've compared Nyx to in this series. I don't have a particularly hot take on Mozu, I do like her, but I'm not over the moon for her like some others I've seen. And Odin and Elise are two units I consider extremely overrated, especially recently. In fact, after much deliberation, I've come to consider Odin the worst base Dark Mage in the game. More of a failure on his part than a success on his competition's part. I've seen the arguments to put all three of these units as high as A tier, I just don't agree with them. So in the unit-to-unit comparisons I've been doing occasionally, Nyx hasn't had to do much to prove her worth. That's why I've secretly been training Nyx's greatest adversary alongside her the entire time. Niles is a unit I have a very high opinion of. From a meta perspective, he's easily top 10 material at worst, and that's before taking his personal skill into account. That's strong enough that, in the early game, Nyx was content with simply being a weaker version of him. But after so many new recruitments, she's gonna have to put in a little more work than that to earn her deployment slot. Let's see what she's up against. After getting Lucky 7, I've given this Niles a Heart Seal into Sorcerer, giving him Heartseeker and Malefic Aura, meaning he now matches all of Nyx's Dark Mage, Outlaw, and Adventurer skills. And I've been building his support with Baruka, giving him access to the best class line in the game. Between Wyvern Lord and Malignite, both are extremely viable. But in this case, I'll be taking advantage of Niles' magic base and turning him to a Malignite. Catch what I did there? Niles is now a 9 movement, 1-2 range, magical flyer. In other words, he is almost all of Nyx's strengths and more. Though his personal magic is lower than Nyx's, Malignite's class bases compared to Kinchunite give the two equivalent magic stats. Not only that, but Niles is significantly bulkier than Nyx on both the physical and magical sides of the spectrum, giving him a real enemy phase, as opposed to picking off 1 or 2 enemies at a time. So is it over for Nyx? Hardly. Despite Niles getting more experience than her, Nyx still has a respectable speed lead and significant attack lead over Niles. The latter of which is for 2 reasons: Quick Draw and the Shining Bow. If we're generous and give Niles a Fire +2, Nyx still has a whopping +10 attack lead on player phase, which is extremely significant. Niles' biggest issue is unequivocally attack power. As a mixed attacker, he doesn't excel with either strength or magic. If your goal is to fix that, you may have to resort to the Bolt Axe, but as you might have noticed, he currently has E rank axes, so it'll take 50 combats to be able to wield it. As a refresher, Nyx was at C bows by chapter 11, 3 maps before you even get the Shining Bow. You could try building axe rank early with Arthur Friendship, but that has its own problems. Namely, it's harder to work in his hit boosting skills, which he'll absolutely need if he's using a 65 hit weapon. It's also very possible that he'll demand a pair up to reach thresholds, especially now that enemy stats are ramping up. One of Nyx's greatest strengths is being able to do things unpaired to improve your action economy, so this is not a trivial ask. While this Nyx build is generally thought of as high investment, in this case, it's Niles who's asking for more. We already went over 3 reasons why, see if you can spot them, but the biggest ask is Wyvern marriage. Camilla and Veruca are 2 of the most contested marriage partners in the game. Almost every male unit would kill to get Wyvern by marrying one of those 2. So this is actually a very costly investment. Remember, 9 move and flight without marriage is completely unique to Nyx, which is another one of her best traits. I consider marriage investment a tier above heart or friendship seal investment, as it asks for a much bigger team building commitment. So out of the 2 builds I see before me, which one is better? No idea. Both of them have their pros and cons, but that's exactly my point. This is Nyx standing up to one of the best builds of one of the best units in the game. There's still a large disparity between them overall, due to Niles' more well-rounded stats, less reliance on reclassing, and significantly better personal skill, most of which matter more in the early game. But when their builds are almost finalized, it's, shockingly, a lot more even than you'd think. Niles is the one unit who can reasonably threaten Nyx's niche. When the 2 of them sink their teeth into this map, I'll let you be the judge of whether he succeeds or not. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. Still, I love using Niles, so I'll do my best to show him in a positive light. To round out the cast, I brought my few remaining units who still want to build supports, sans Silas and Selena, because I haven't been able to promote them yet due to my limited Master Seals. One went to Percy, but the final Master Seal goes to, of all units, Benny. I've been delaying his promotion until after chapter 19, because my preferred promotion for him is Great Knight, but I didn't want him to acquire a beast weakness against the Kitsune with Beast Pain. If your goal is simply to bench Benny after chapter 19, General is the right choice, but Great Knight is better for every map after that because of its higher movement.
I'll do my best.
My game plan for this chapter is to split my forces to clear the left and right sides of the map simultaneously, working my way up from the bottom and using the wind to advance northwards. The western squadron will be helmed by Mozu, and the eastern brigade is of course led by Nyx. This should demonstrate the speed and power of player phase hyper-offense strategies, letting me play extremely aggressively and eliminate Fuga in record time. Once that's done, I'll go over my concluding thoughts / ramblings on this series, Nyx as a unit, and the context surrounding her. So without further ado, let's begin. Corrin uses her newfound rallies immediately. Peri needs the bulk, Keaton needs it to double, and Benny needs it to avoid getting doubled. Camilla is about to proc the Dragon Vein, which activates the map's central gimmick, the wind. Wind, signified by these yellow and orange bands, pushes your units 5 tiles in the indicated direction, skipping the first gap of inaccessible tiles and getting stopped by any subsequent ones. Of course, since almost no tiles are inaccessible for flyers, that makes the geometry a lot easier to calculate for this flyer-centric team. The wind goes off automatically at the end of each turn, moving only the player units, but if you proc the Dragon Vein, it goes off early and moves enemies as well. There are 2 things that accomplishes for us. It moves Corrin further up for next turn, and it pushes these Falcon Knights and infantry down for us to fight a little early. Benny is not affected since there's no ground below him to stand on. It's a fairly complicated and disruptive mechanic, giving this map a negative reputation among new players, but once you get a feel for how it works, it's probably the most fun gimmick to play around with in this entire game. I just put 3 flyers in range of 2 Kinchi Knights. Am I stupid? No, they have linked AI with the nearby lance users. They'll only move into attack if you're in range of their buddies, so we're completely safe here. This is also the case for the northwesternmost formation. This Benny positioning is a bit aggressive, but necessary for him to reach the Falcon Knights next turn. It also wouldn't be possible without the extra movement from Great Knight. Kaze and the weirdly res-blessed Mozu earn the last form points they need for their S-support turn 1, so they can move separately as soon as possible. They don't have great synergy on this map, since they're both very important, but for very different tasks, so it's nice to get this pairing out of the way. Another impactful rally from Corrin as we prepare to tackle the right side. With enough flyers, getting to the enemies isn't too hard, but killing them can be another story. The Spearmasters are an unfortunate combination of fast and bulky that makes them difficult to one-round for most units without a lot of stacking. Peri is built different, and Camilla can do it with a dual strike, but it's all but impossible for Niles or Percy. The Kinchi Knights, meanwhile, have air superiority, punishing our team layout by buffing their avoid. This is where Niles shows his strengths. With Heartseeker and Lucky 7, he has no problem hitting. As you can see though, Camilla isn't so lucky on that dual strike. There aren't a lot of units, especially flying units, that match up well against both enemy types. Nyx is an exception. With air superiority, she has better hit stack than Niles, and even better damage output than Camilla. So while her good matchup against flyers is obvious, her real value comes from fighting the infantry with her ludicrous offensive stats, making pushes like this much, much easier. Mozu doesn't actually need to be healed here, but there is a very niche sequence of events that causes Felicia to benefit from healing herself with Live to Serve. Involving a round of combat, Felicia doesn't even do at all in this version of the clear. Of course, it's unlikely to matter, because it requires her to repeatedly get hit through Tomebreaker, but better safe than sorry. Benny's massive bulk means he doesn't even care about getting hexed as he beast killers these falcon knights to death. If Hayato was smart, he'd hex Azura instead, but Benny's lower staff avoid, combined with the fact that he gets doubled, tricks him into thinking he's the more valuable target. This is also where Benny and Azura get that support they wanted. 2 pairings down, 1 to go. Corrin wants to rally for Keaton, but Benny doesn't want to buff his defense for fear of having the enemies ignore him, so he tactically retreats into Mozu. Benny does the same trick again, luring in this stray falcon knight to get a dose of the beast killer. Since it has armor blow, he needs Mozu's dual strike to finish the job. Some reinforcements showed up at the end of last turn, so we made sure we were ready for them. Felicia does her thing and kills mages real good, while Nix's squad fights the Falcon Spearmaster pairs. They can be tricky if you're not ready for them since they move unprovoked, so I highly recommend playing aggressively like this so you can fight them as they spawn.
Yay!
Because Nyx was early promoted to level 13, she gets promoted skills very quickly, including Lucky 7 and Air Superiority, giving her a whopping plus 50 hit stack against flyers, in addition to her 39 might weapon. She's so accurate, she's not even bothered by the Chapter 24 Bowbreaker enemies, especially if you equip Heartseeker, and especially if you grab Certain Blow. The whole get promoted skills early thing is also very nice to grab the busted level 15 skills she has access to, like Shuriken Breaker, Life Taker, and of course, Bowfair, if her damage stack wasn't good enough for you somehow. This makes it very easy for her to keep up despite missing out on a few level ups, which is another reason I'm so comfortable early promoting her into Sniper or Adventurer. Nyx's side has things handled, so Peri and Percy fly over to give the more spawn to Mozu's squadron a hand, as the wind means they'll be in a sticky situation next turn. Felicia and Leo finish their support, the last support of the map, on these Onmyojis, though they'll keep working together on the following turns since they have good synergy anyway. I've really grown to appreciate Felicia as a mage killer. It's nice to have a second one of those while Kaze is busy on the other side of the map. Speaking of Kaze, he just got hexed, which luckily doesn't really matter. Letting your max HP get halved doesn't do anything if you have the raw bulk to just live anyway. I also learned something new about how hexing rods and HP tonics interact from this interaction, unfortunately making my defense tonic redundant, but hey, that's the price of knowledge.
Appearing.
Soleil, with Sisterhood from Camilla pair up, goes ahead and fights the priestesses on Fuga's platform. All of them. Bow enemy phases, am I right? Bow Knight isn't the most interesting class in the world, but it's a hell of a lot cooler than a Soul Ninja. So if your only experience with Soleil is in a dagger class, I highly recommend taking her high stats to her, dare I say, more fun class option. It also has a couple other benefits that I'll go over in the post-clear ramblings.
Yay, violence!
Hey, rally defense on a second unit. But who needs rallies when you can just kill everything yourself? Peri still has a large enemy phase ahead of her after all. That's why she's been using the Blessed Lance to heal herself up in preparation for the coming swarm. Mozu has some slack in her action economy, so she can help out in the event of an unforeseen disaster. Here, she just gives Keaton an adjacency bonus. Hayato is fast and bulky with the Horde Spirit, so Corrin needs Kaze pair up and Darting Blow to one-round him. He's also pretty scary with a ton of magic and Luna, which has a chance to have Corrin's resistance. Luckily her res is terrible anyway, so if it procs, it's only 3 more damage. Enfeeble, unlike the Hexing Rod, is actually pretty threatening, so we can't afford to let Kaze tank the staff use this time. Luckily, we can trick the Priestess's AI into targeting Corrin, since it forgets Kaze is blocking the enemy's range, and she has the lower staff avoid, making her the higher priority target and saving us some headache. Leo fights adjacently, even though it breaks his guard gauge, since the extra reliability of Heartseeker is more important than keeping his health up.
Remain calm.
I'll do what no one else can.
Stepping on Fuga's platform activates a ton of reinforcements on both it and the northwest platform. We'll clear out what we can for now. Well, we barely made a dent, and Mozu's side is getting overwhelmed too. I'll admit I may have overextended a bit much this time. Just kidding! Leo procs the Dragon Main, simultaneously letting Mozu's side retreat and pushing the enemies away from Nyx's side. I love map gimmicks. Supportive, Heartseeker, and adjacency bonuses impressively give Keaton perfect hit rates despite double weapon triangle disadvantage. Kaze will engage the Kinshi Knights on enemy phase. I made sure to stack his strength to the point where he could one round with a bronze dagger, so he doesn't risk critting and suffering from success by not filling up his guard gauge enough to survive. Benny is done with combat for this clear, so he trades away his B-Skiller and joins up with Peri for a couple of very important support jobs he has to do on the other side of the map. The first of which is paraplotting for Peri herself. Here's that very combat I was talking about. Stat stack to high hell with Bloodthirst, Inspiring Song, and Rally Defense to clean up these stray enemies. Credit where credit's due, she's been one of our most impressive combat units this clear. I'm proud of her. This Onmyoji has random enemy movement, which used to matter, but in this new, improved, and Benny-pilled draft of the clear, none of his possible positions can mess anything up for us. There's also a bit of random enemy movement involved with these Falcon Knights, which slightly matters. If they're kind, they'll let Corrin attack from a tile where she can support Keaton as he fights the Priestess. He always kills thanks to Darting Blow, and is tanky enough to live an effective steel Hankyu to the face after better odds, so that's never a problem. But if the Falcons feel like slightly inconveniencing me and make Corrin move elsewhere, Keaton's hit rates won't be perfect. Otherwise though, there should never be a pattern you have to reset for or anything like that. With the wind as our springboard, believe it or not, it's already time to challenge the northwest platform. On this map, even when the enemies outrange you, you can use the momentum from the wind to essentially surprise attack them. Even Leo, who's been on an adventure at the bottom side of the map, can get in on the action. Now it's just some simple player phasing to cap this map off and grab the last treasure. Camilla chips Fuga, assisted by Heartseeker and Fierce Mien, which I've since been informed is actually pronounced Fierce Mien, my bad. I made sure to forge her axe to +2 specifically so Soul couldn't screw me over at the last minute, though it did incidentally save a strength tonic on Peri while she was using it. Not that I have anything left to prove at this point, but hey, just for fun, here's Nyx with 100% hit rates against a 78 Avoid Fuga, from throne bonuses and his personal skill, Wind Disciple. You already knew Nyx's hit was good, but it feels fitting to kill the last enemy of the series with Nyx hitting an extremely impressive accuracy benchmark. If all you wanted from the series was a guide on, well, how to train your Nyx, then with that, I fulfilled my promise. But if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on Nyx from a meta perspective, keep watching. This video is far from over. Nile selfishly steals Nyx's Valor and seizes the throne after a breezy 7-turn clear, meaning we routed the map and grabbed every treasure before Lucky 7 has even had time to run out. Hopefully that's made my point about the speed and power of Layer Base Hyper Offense, especially when enabled by Nyx. But how about the unit herself? Well, strap in. I started the series over a year ago, At the time, though I was experienced with Conquest, I hadn't really come into my own particular takes yet, and defaulted to agreeing with a lot of common consensus, even if that consensus contradicted my own thoughts and experience. But Nyx was the catalyst that made me re-examine my thoughts on a lot of units in this game. I didn't have high expectations when I started using her, long before the series began, but even despite that, her incredible contributions were impossible to ignore, and finally pushed me over the edge to today, where I'm much more comfortable feeling and expressing my less popular opinions. I've played a lot of Fates since then, and both my takes and video making ability have matured. For a comedic example of this, I went from advocating for the Ophelia Paralog rewards to condemning them as the episodes went on, and my opinions evolved. So I have to say, I was wrong about Nyx. She's even better than I thought she was. She may not be topping the meta charts anytime soon. She does have stiff competition after all, but she's nonetheless a fantastic unit. You've watched this far, so now it's finally time for me to make my case as to why using Nyx this way is absolutely worth it. In other words, this is a meta-analysis. Asterisk, read this if you care. In this series, you've seen Nyx perform well at all stages of the game. At base, she's a fairly serviceable Dark Mage, with better offensive stats than her competition, Odin. She tends to be disfavored compared to him due to her lower hit and bulk, but in practice, both of them are frail without under-the-counter help, and Nyx's hit rates, even as a Dark Mage, remain very good if you know how to apply her, particularly with Heartseeker. As an example I've been wanting to share ever since I thought of it, Nyx with Fire is more accurate than, for example, Effie at both 1 and 2 range, because at 1 range, Heartseeker is applied, and at 2 range, Effie is forced to use the inaccurate Javelin. I have much more to say comparing Odin and Nyx's early game contributions, and almost did, but that would just evolve into me slandering Odin repeatedly, and you don't need to drag Odin down to think Nyx is good, so I cut it for pacing. Long story short though, I find it dishonest to claim Nyx is significantly worse than her competition as an early game tome user. They're both completely fine, and she's perfectly capable of replicating many of his contributions, or hitting 1-round thresholds with less resources. Nyx isn't too impressive if you keep her along that path to be sure, but with smart application of one of the 2 early heart seals, she gains bow access, which is enough to catapult any early game unit because bows have great matchups for every chapter from 10 to 14, even with her low strength. The mid-game tries to throw a few curveballs at her, but even then, Shining Bow access and either Lucky 7 or Sniper's huge innate hit rates depending on how you use her, carry her to victory even on chapters like 17 and 18. And now, over the next 20 odd minutes, I'll explain why a trained Nyx is one of the best units you can have in your army for the late game. I'm serious about that. This isn't just a case of every Fates unit can become good with enough investment. Nyx's unique traits mean her high ceiling is extremely difficult to replicate, as we've seen by comparing her to the only units who really come close, Elise, Mozu, and Niles, all of whom are missing multiple important pieces of the puzzle. Effie too, for the record, we just didn't get much opportunity to talk about her in this series. Nyx's high magic and speed, 13 my weapon, as well as hit and damage stacking skills are all good for the obvious and uncomplicated utility of killing the enemy. Her high mobility, even beyond flight utility, is extremely useful, not just for facilitating player phase sweeps by outranging the enemies, but also for positioning. We've seen multiple situations in this series alone where move +1 was necessary to reach a strategically relevant tile. If you've ever been just short of reaching somewhere important, you know why that's good. But I also find having this option available opens my eyes to strategies I wouldn't have even thought of otherwise. And that's all without even saying the phrase turn count once. The unrestricted 1-2 range of the Shining Bow is surprisingly perhaps the most niche aspect of her kit, but allows her to see the occasional small enemy phase when the situation demands. It's a nice option, though less relevant as the game goes on and maps become more player phase oriented. She's no Juggernaut, unless you want her to be, put a pin in that, but she doesn't need to be. There aren't any situations in this game that demand more than one Juggernaut anyway. Or any for that matter, put a pin in that too. Then there's hitting on resistance, which gives her improved damage against most enemies, and a greater range of targets she performs well against, such as generals. Meanwhile, highly resistant Falcon Knights and Master Ninjas are enemy types that Nyx still has good matchups against for other reasons. This is an extremely wide array of strengths. Even a few of these traits would be exceptional on the right unit. You know, Mozu, for instance, is still very good. But the combination of all of them means Nyx is the absolute pinnacle of her particular niche. But let's take a step back. What even is that niche in the first place? Player Phase Delete Bot? In this clear, she didn't do much more than kill one enemy per turn. Nothing nearly as flashy as what she did in chapters 11, 17, or 18. Is that really so valuable? Yes, and the reason why is more involved than you'd think. Late game Conquest maps are extremely fond of overlapping enemy ranges. We saw a lot of formations on this map where being in range of one enemy meant being in range of all of them, to the point where even if you are in range of just the Tonics on the eastern platform, for example, they refuse to attack. This is very different from other Fire Emblem games, including the other Fates routes, which place enemies more sporadically. So while enemy phase combat is more of an inevitability in those games, these tight enemy clusters make it possible to go an entire clear without seeing a single round of it on certain Conquest maps. But just because it's possible doesn't make it optimal, so let's compare. For an enemy phase focused clear, you're probably sending 2 units, typically in guard stance, head first into these overlapping range formations, clearing out whatever baddies happened across their path, with support units like Azura, Staffers, and Rally Bots trailing behind to facilitate them. But the support units aren't the ones rushing ahead and making forward progress, so they need to stay out of enemy range. That gives you 2 options. Either leave your support units behind as your Juggernaut rushes as far as possible, having to dedicate more time to catching up, or keeping your Juggernaut at the edge of enemy range, closer to your support units at the cost of making even less progress than them. Particularly if you're trying to spread out, it's difficult to move as quickly as you'd like with either of those strategies, especially since the probably best Juggernaut class in the game, Master Ninja, has a mere 6 move and can't fly. You might say the benefit of enemy phase combat here is to free up your other combat units. But free them up to do what? Since enemy formations are all or nothing, if you already have one unit handling it, it's not like another unit can go clean up anything they missed, since they didn't miss anything. So there are a lot of actions on the table you just aren't using. There are a finite amount of enemy formations you can reach in one turn, particularly on more linear maps. So even if you make an effort to cover a lot of ground, this can result in peanut gallery syndrome, where you have a lot of units that can theoretically step in to do combat, but never get the opportunity to, unless you consciously have your main Juggernaut step out. Alternatively, you can dedicate these deployment slots to increasingly niche and granular support functions, but that doesn't really fix the core issue. With player phase strategies, you're still diving just as deep into enemy territory, but the difference is you're actually clearing everyone out as you get there, rather than waiting for the red units to take their actions. So your support units can move further without being in enemy range, and you need less of them. Since you're not taking counterattacks, you don't need a Parabot for guard gauge, and you don't need to dedicate actions to healing, whether that be through staff uses or vulneraries. That means you can spend more actions for more player phase combat or more movement tech, to spread your units further out or get to hard to reach areas on the map much quicker. It's a positive feedback loop. Enemy phase combat is theoretically more action economy efficient, since you're using the enemy's actions, rather than your own, to kill them. But because of all those combat units you aren't using, player phase strategies get to make up the difference and make the same or more progress in a single turn. In these situations, the only thing enemy phase combat is optimizing for you is the least interesting metric possible, minimum thought required to play the video game, which it's no secret I value next to nothing. So in reality, having one unit merely stroll along through the enemies often isn't any more efficient than having a bunch of units charge towards them. In some cases, it's less efficient. To give a more concrete example, the poster child of this for our clear was Soleil. Let's consider for a moment what would have changed if I used her on enemy phase as a Master Ninja, the better Generalist class, as opposed to a Bow Knight. Well, she could probably have handled this formation on her own with sufficient stat stacking. That's good, that's efficient. The next turn though, it's unfortunately impossible to kill these 2 pairs of enemies with only 1 unit. Granted, we also left one alive in our clear, but that's because we had spare player phase actions available to do so next turn. If Soleil wants to keep the same pace as the original clear, she doesn't have that luxury, because that's the turn she's supposed to be up here, fighting the priestesses. There's no way around it. Soleil's gonna need help from another combat unit, say Camilla, to do everything she needs to do on this side of the map. Unfortunately, in this hypothetical, Camilla would have to be pretty far away for a while, as her being in enemy range on turn 2 would interfere with Soleil and likely get her shot down by a Knight, meaning Camilla's a bit aimless on that turn without much to do anywhere else. Unlike in our clear where they were right next to each other due to seeing player phase combat together, thus letting Camilla ferry Soleil to Fuga's platform without any hassle. Conversely, Soleil would have needed more help from support units like Corrin and Felicia, which is a huge problem because they were busy on the complete opposite side of the map. The reason we were able to reach Fuga so quickly without straining our team was explicitly because our units, particularly Nyx, or working in tandem as a player phase squad. Even on the turn Soleil saw combat in our clear, she was unable to do so because Bow Knight isn't a generalist class. It's specialized with high movement and bow access, meaning she has very strong effective damage for the Falcon Knights, much stronger than the Hunter's Knife, is weapon triangle neutral against priestesses, and she can quickly move over to nearby enemies she missed. Mechanist has bows, but it also has worse para bonuses, which is relevant because Peri was using those. The point is, what seems more efficient over the course of a single turn often winds up being less efficient over the course of a full clear, and a lot of the time, that's what enemy phase is. Don't believe me? Chapter 17, the most enemy phase-centric map of the run, was also by far the slowest at a whopping 15 turns. When I got to actually take advantage of player phase hyper-offense strategies, I easily halved that, despite having a lot of side objectives to attend to. While acknowledging this isn't a perfect comparison, that's not a coincidence. Enemy phase units do have a place in these clears, but they're not on the front lines. Leo and Felicia were great on this map, specifically because they weren't the ones making forward progress. They stayed back and dealt with reinforcements at the bottom of the map, only joining up with the main team once their job was done, so they could start doing player phase combat. That's genuinely a great role for your enemy phase sweepers. Fittingly, cleanup duty is what they're best at. But if you make them lead the charge, anyone who tries to follow will only end up confused and in disarray. In fact, all the enemy phase combat this clear worked because it involved fighting enemies that were out of the way. Very far forward, very far to the right, on a platform, extremely far from the action. Basically, stuff that's hard to fight while improving your position, as it makes the enemies come to you rather than you come to the enemies. If the enemies occupy a space that would improve your position, you want as many units over there as possible, and that means player phasing them, so you can quickly gain area control without leaving anyone behind. And because of the way Conquest maps are designed, most spaces the enemies occupy do improve your position, making player phasing extremely powerful. For all these reasons, and the aforementioned map gimmicks, most late game maps are very player phase heavy. Point to any tough enemy formation at this stretch of the game, and I assure you it's not only possible, but in many cases genuinely easier to player phase them, in my opinion. Chapters 22 and 24, for example, are set up so favorably for player phase sweeps that even though they don't explicitly punish enemy phasing, not engaging with this aspect of the map genuinely feels like a misplay, particularly for the mini-bosses Hana and Setsuna. Chapters 23 and 26 have a few places where enemy phase works well, but they also have formations with high enemy stats and density, punishing all but the tankiest of juggernauts, which it isn't a guarantee you have, nor necessarily should you. And 25 and Endgame go so far as to introduce explicit anti-juggernaut mechanics, like Inevitable and Debuffs, as well as 3-range enemies with Lunge or Poison Strike. You have to go out of your way to find places to enemy phase on these maps, and while I appreciate doing everything in your power to subvert dev intent, the deck is stacked so heavily in both rewarding player phase offense and punishing juggernauting that you're really just shooting yourself in the foot. Relying solely on a handful of enemy phase sweepers for the rest of the game means you're very prone to getting screwed over at these 2 late game player phase checks when your army mysteriously matches up poorly against them. Meaning some players instead divert the effort that could be spent building a diverse army to attaining the exact resources they need to specifically avoid playing these maps. And trust me, we'll get to that. I have very strong feelings on that sentiment, it just makes more sense for me to address it later. That's a lot of yapping about stuff that isn't nice, but it's important context to build, especially because, after experienced Conquest players realized juggernauting was an option, I feel like some of them overcorrected from Conquest is a player phase game to player phase has no niche in Conquest, which simply isn't true. I'd prefer not to overstate my case like this, but with a reputation as terrible as Nyx has, especially one built on such a flawed foundation, I genuinely do have to go into this much detail to mend these misconceptions. You can disagree with me on how much you personally value player phase combat, and that's fine. Some of this definitely does come down to a playstyle difference between me and my contemporaries, but don't use that as an excuse to brush off everything I've said, as I also think a lot of genuine merit to certain strategies is missed in the pursuit of making the game quote-unquote easier, a task I don't even think juggernauting convincingly accomplishes, though that's obviously subjective. I'm not sure how contentious the whole player phase good take is among the general player base, but it's something I've always felt to be true, and now that I've actually substantiated it, I feel pretty confident about it. So now that we know player phasing is a valuable role, the fact that Nyx is so good at it starts looking really exceptional. This is around the point in the game where enemy stats start ramping up, especially on maps like Chapter 23, where they buff themselves with rallies, and Endgame, which is the whole thing. Nyx's high offensive stats mean she's not worried about the enemy's increased bulk, even without much investment. But hold on, this is Conquest, the premier stat stacking game. With enough resources, any unit can reach any threshold, so what's so special about Nyx? But there's the rub. With enough resources, other units may have to dedicate multiple actions to do the same things Nyx does effortlessly, with, for instance, a parapot, hindering your action economy. That means what works for enemy phase units is often a lot worse if you're trying to get the most of your actions on player phase. I won't hold the cost of stuff like tonics and forges against these other units, since Nyx certainly does require her own monetary investment, albeit one that helps over the course of a whole run rather than one or a handful of maps. But I do feel the need to point out that Nyx didn't need a single tonic this clear, or more relevantly, any pair-ups. The only time she's ever paired up here is completely incidental. She does not benefit from it in any way. After her first level up on this map, she hits every meaningful benchmark against generic enemies with just a meal. Keep in mind, this is an early promoted Nyx. Imagine what a reasonably leveled one could do. My other units this clear were not nearly as extraordinary. You saw all the forges and power-ups yourself, and the tonics were rampant. I list the tonics used in the description of every video if you're curious. Not to mention, units like Mozu often require dual strikes to hit relevant thresholds, which mandates specific positioning. Nyx does need some investment to get off the ground, but once she gets rolling, she's very self-sufficient, and I often find myself seeing combat with her completely unsupported. Combined with her high mobility, that makes her exceptional at getting the first strike off against a given formation, killing one enemy on her own and providing dual strikes to your other units for the rest of them. Giving her the same resources as everyone else just lets her hit the truly insane thresholds, like one-rounding Fuga, a thing she can do with relative ease if you really want her to. The fact that Nyx's investment cost is so front-loaded, to the point where she barely needs any help to contribute here on Chapter 20 for example, is surprisingly convenient in a game where the late game is actually harder than the early game for once. There are still reasons to spend resources on her at this point, but that's more of a bonus, and just speaks to the plethora of ways she can take her already high ceiling even higher, which is strictly an upside. The takeaway from this is there are going to be a lot of situations where a unit who has absolutely min-maxed her player phase, particularly with Move Plus 1, will perform better than a unit that is simply decent on both phases. And here's a secret. Juggernaut utility isn't actually that unique. Every unit in the game can do it, including Nyx. But she can also do other stuff that is unique, and fills a very relevant role on your team other units can't. So there's the secret third, or maybe fourth reason I haven't been considering Vantage Life and Death Nyx in this series. If you're an Ophelia fan, I hope I've given you something to chew on. I'd elaborate on that statement, but I don't feel like it. Either way, you definitely don't want all your combat units to be enemy phase generalists. If you already have that niche covered on every relevant front, by definition, you don't need any more. It just makes sense to branch out and specialize with a unit like Nyx to cover more bases than you could otherwise. She'll certainly contribute more than your 5th best support unit. Frankly, if you let her, she'll be one of your best units, period. There are a lot of units in Fire Emblem that are good on paper, but bad in practice. Nyx is the exact opposite. By all accounts, she shouldn't be good. Her stats outside of magic and speed do not paint a flattering picture. Even the best way to use her sounds like a joke. Oh, you're putting this magical dark mage in a physical class? Get out of town. But it's completely serious. What she has that sets her apart from every other unit in the game is exactly her exceptional class access. All three of Dark Mage, Outlaw, and Archer are some of the best classes in the game because of their incredible skills, access to some of the best weapon types in the game, and options for high mobility. Those bow classes are also incredibly rare. Despite being a Norian class, there's only one other first generation unit in the entire game, and a pair of boots, with innate access to Outlaw. Meanwhile, the only way any unit can get Archer without Corrin is through Mozu, and only Nyx and Effie have the option to befriend her. These classes allow her to carve out a niche that is simultaneously extremely unique, extremely powerful for the part of the game it matches up against, and doesn't rely on any of her bad stats, instead taking full advantage of her good ones. Sure, it would be nice if she had more bulk to pull off some truly crazy stunts, but even without it, she's still exceptional. And the fact that she has so many good matchups at every stage of her training arc, with the notable exception of Chapter 16, really makes you wonder if the devs are just playing an elaborate practical joke on us. Everything about her just works. You don't have to be a player-face junkie like me to appreciate what Nyx brings to the table. If you tend to see a balance of both faces, Nyx is very easy to slot into almost any team, as her niche is almost always appreciated at least somewhere on the map. even if you just want her for the specific groups your Juggernaut can't handle or isn't available for. Which will come up. Not even Super Ophelia can do everything, especially not reliably. This series only focused on one specific class routing option, early promoted adventure into Kimchi Knight. But if you come away from all this thinking that's the only trick in our arsenal, I've been seriously underselling Nyx. You should absolutely feel free to change into different classes at different times depending on your priorities. If training Mozu is too much of a bother for you, hey, she has plenty of options that don't even involve Archer. Her biggest weakness, besides survivability, is the fact that she falls off if you don't reclass her at all, but that's an extremely common trait, shared by the likes of Corrin, Silas, and Effie, which are commonly considered some of the best units in the game. I'm not gonna act like I invented Shining Mo Nyx. It's something that came up in discussions surrounding her long before I hit the Conquest scene.
Right. So Nyx does get friendship with Mozu, which means she can get sniper, archer, tree sniper, Kenshi.
But whenever it did, it was always prefaced with the idea that it somehow wasn't worth the investment.
She can fix it if you go through the effort to get her through those classes and get those accuracy boosting skills. It's a lot of work.
That's what I'd like to push back against. What you've seen in episodes 1 through 9 of this series is that the effort and resources it takes to get Nyx going is severely overblown. I gave no more to Nyx, either in experience or seals, than my other training projects like Niles, Peri, and Corrin, which I think was a very standard amount. It's also extremely viable to spend only one seal, either heart or friendship depending on your preference, on Nyx before this point, and wait to do your more involved class routing until after you unlock the tier 3 shops and seals become unlimited. Suddenly, Nyx isn't even looking any higher investment than someone like Maid Evie, even down to the weapon rank training they need for their most unique contributions. She is higher level, but only because she early promoted, so her internal level is lower. And it's not as if she had to scrounge around for her experience. She was self-sufficient and making huge contributions as early as Chapter 10. If the reward wasn't anything special, I would understand the sentiment, but it absolutely is. 9 movement, flight, 1-2 range, magic and speed to spare, and the ability to augment her hit rates with skills like Heartseeker and Lucky 7, Nyx displays the absolute pinnacle of player phase combat. A unique and valuable niche that's heavily rewarded in every map going forward. She's not cleaving through groups of enemies on enemy phase, at least not usually, but in any other situation, including those your standard juggernauts are ill-equipped to handle, she excels. Her value is not measured in the number of kills she gets, but in her sheer versatility, allowing you to pull off strategies other units could only dream of. Sure, Nyx might be higher investment than units like Odin and Mozu, but if you're willing to humor her, she eclipses them. Cost is only half of the unit value equation. The other is payoff. And Nyx's payoff is off the charts. So if you take nothing else from the series, let it be this. Nyx is worth the investment, and you should train your Nyx. I could end the video there, but there are 2 things I'd like to address before we finish. The first is a brief aside on tiering philosophy. I talked about it a bit in text format, but this is too important to be missable. A lot of meta discussion boils down to how good are they compared to other units. This has not been that and will not be that. I'm staying true to my word that I'm not ranking Nyx on a tier list in this video. And a big part of that is because that process is intensely subjective, in both obvious and inobvious ways. There are too many variables to consider that inevitably a lot of this will come down to your metrics, playstyle, or what you personally value or don't value in a unit. In this video, I've tried to detail how Nyx performs in practice, under a specific context, and that context is an important point if tiering is what you care about. The most major sources of that dissonance that might cause me to rank Nyx higher than others, as far as I can tell, come down to 2 things. First, I like side objectives. I like getting every treasure, I like training a full team, I like routing maps when it's convenient. Occasionally, I like going for full recruitment or full marriage. And I like doing all that both quickly and reliably. You don't have to do that. A lot of people don't. Second, I don't value strategies based on how little thought it requires to execute them. I bought the game for the express purpose of thinking. I'm much more concerned with the actual results as detailed under that first point. Let's also not confuse low thought with easy. Both of those are very nebulous terms, but just as an example, bashing your head against a brick wall until you get good RNG doesn't require much thought, but also isn't easy to make work. The term think smarter not harder exists for this exact reason. There are a lot of strategies that technically require more effort that I find easier to execute in practice, in addition to their other benefits. This is the context under which Nyx performs very well. It's the context under which I'm praising her, and the context I find most fun. But it's not the only way you can play the game, nor am I claiming it's definitively the best one. If your one and only goal is beating the game, and your main priority is doing so without needing to expend much effort, something like Septi's main Camilla solo will probably appeal to you much more. So yes, I obviously have a particular approach to this game that is conducive to making Nyx shine, but interestingly enough, it goes both ways too. In the process of laying out her objective traits, I've realized even I held some inexplicable bias against Nyx, if you can believe it. Some of that comes down to popular tiering conceptions being very hard to shake. They're something you'll always subconsciously keep in mind even if you disagree with them. The more interesting side of that is subjective questions the answers to which I'm either not sure my personal answer to, or fall on the side that is explicitly disfavorable to Nyx. That's why, despite the fact that I've just spent the past 20 minutes praising her with like facts and logic and stuff, I probably rate her lower relative to other units than you might expect. As an example, I tend to appreciate units who have a lot of different tools in their arsenal, different viable paths they have the option to go down, units like Effie in particular. Nyx obviously has that too, but mostly in the sense of taking different routes to ultimately fulfill the same niche, so it's a little different. Though do note I'm absolutely simplifying things here. Regardless, that's not a strength or a weakness per se. Build variety isn't important in the context of a single playthrough, where you're committing to exactly one of them. If that's how you approach this topic, you might appreciate her min-max approach, where she excels at one role along the lines of someone like Kaze, more than, for example, Selena, who has a lot of different things she can do, but isn't the best at any single one of them. What about something like Heartseeker for support purposes, or Nyx's para bonuses, strengths I didn't even mention until now, because I didn't really know how to. How do you evaluate those? There are a lot of these very contentious aspects to Nyx as a unit that get to deeper questions about Conquest as a game and how people conceptualize it, some of which we addressed and some of which we didn't. So she's the kind of unit where I would absolutely accept either a higher or lower placement, within reason, than the one I personally give her. It comes down to your own idiosyncrasies, which is why I would definitely recommend using Nyx yourself to make sense of it. Though I do want to stress that, figuring out where you place a unit on a tier list is the absolute least important aspect of unit discussion. It's just the flashiest, so it's what people talk about. Just knowing what a unit does and how you feel about that, without dismissing them out of hand, is the main thing. As I sort through this tangled bias, I usually come out of it feeling better about Nyx from a meta standpoint, which is hopefully a good indication that there's genuine truth to this. I'm not just crazy. That's a nice sanity check at least. The second semi-related thing is this, and be warned, we're getting into fairly contentious and definitely subjective territory. A lot of my thoughts on Nyx are informed by my thoughts on the late game Conquest maps, and how she matches up well against them. However, I feel that the late game of Conquest is the most misunderstood part of it. Because of its high difficulty at a time when some people just want to see the credits already, a lot of players refuse to engage with it, employing so-called cheese strategies even when they literally make the game harder. Yes, I'm serious. Because of that, I feel like a lot of players don't know how to evaluate late game contributions, and often just gloss over them entirely, or rank units specifically on how well they don't play those maps. Look at all the past Falconite defenders out there and tell me there's a god. That's genuinely a huge shame, because in addition to all the other things that are true about it, the late game is also my favorite part of Conquest. Chapters 22 through 25, and recently, Endgame, all rank among my favorite maps in the entire game, entire franchise even. So factoring them out of discussion just because the path of least resistance is no longer honest enemy phasing is doing them a huge disservice, especially when, realistically, that's when a unit standing out from the pack is at its most valuable. In fact, here's a question for you. Why is Endgame the map everyone skips? It's a fairly short map, only around 6 turns if you're not rushing. I also don't think it's nearly as hard as people say it is, as long as you've built a functional team. You have a limited amount of rescue charges. Wouldn't they be better spent on a longer map like Chapter 17? Or perhaps for strategic purposes like hit and run tactics? That's a rhetorical question, of course. The reason people skip Endgame is because they simply don't want to play it. I've even seen people treat this as a foregone conclusion. Of course you're skipping Endgame. Therefore, any contributions the unit has when playing it legit don't really matter. How come, for example, Chapter 10 contributions are considered? You can cheese that map too, and it's a defend map, so nothing any unit does can make it end any faster. It's essentially all for self-improvement. As far as I'm concerned, Chapter 10 has a way better argument for contributions not mattering than something like Endgame, as even if you do skip Endgame, it's still a map you have to knowingly prepare for in advance. But people like Chapter 10, myself included, so they do play it, and they do talk about what units are good on it. There's nothing objective about late game contributions mattering less than early ones. Sure, every unit can be good at that point, but in distinct ways, due to their different stat spreads and different access to more or less valuable builds that match up better or worse against specific maps, meaning there's still a lot of intricacy to be found here. This isn't even about Nyx anymore. More than anything, I just want to show people what I love so much about this incredible stretch of the game, and draw attention to some interesting strategies for it you may not have seen before. I think skipping, cheesing, or simply not considering late game maps is missing a huge part of what makes Conquest Conquest. So I feel it's my duty to shed some light on these often overlooked maps, like I've done for this often overlooked unit. While I don't have much reason to do so in the context of this series, that doesn't mean I won't do it at all, as, to be honest, I probably feel even stronger about this than I do about Nyx's viability. I've done my fair share of yapping about these maps, so it only feels right that you get to see what they look like in practice. In a different playthrough, of course. So, until then, this has been Coding It, and I'll see you in chapter 21, probably. I haven't actually decided if I want to record chapter 21 or skip straight to 22, but point is, I'm going to be making videos on the late game chapters at some point in the future. So if that's something that interests you, stay tuned.